9001, ISO 1345, and how it's applicable to your business and which one should you choose. As you can see, that ISO 1345 says that you've got medical devices, right? So, webinar over. We don't have to talk any further. That one obviously means that you've got to be in the medical device industry, right? Wrong. We've got options for both. So, we want to go through and see, does 1345 make the most sense for your business? What you're getting into if you do choose that standard, and how 9001 is the foundation for it. So we're going to cover scope and application, so how it's good for all industries. And 1345, as I mentioned, is specific to that medical device industry section. Structural differences between the two, the key focus areas, because the clauses, while they're lined up with similar ideas, they don't line exactly the same, and there's differences between both. And then again, I'm going to help you choose which one is the standard that makes the most sense for your business, ISO 9001 versus 1345, and how it's applicable. All right, so a little bit of background. Who is ISO? ISO stands for the International Standards Organization. They are a global entity, and each country has a team that sits on a board, and they bring in industry experts. They'll open it up for public comments. They'll allow anybody and everybody to say and add their 2 cents as to what needs to change on a standard to make it better. So currently, right now, ISO 9001 is going through a public comment revision. So you can look at the draft at what it's taken a couple of years for the entire world to agree upon. So you can imagine how difficult that is to get the entire world to say, yes, we agree that this makes the most sense. Yes, this is the right wording. So now they're opening it up for public comment, and anybody and everybody can come in and say, ooh, no, that's a little vague still. Can we clarify? Or that's not applicable. It doesn't work. So we use ANSI, ANSI, as our USA standard body. And they are the ones that will go to the medical device sector and find medical device experts. For example, the FDA. Recently, ISO 13485 has become the regulatory standard for the Food and Drug Administration. So instead of them sitting back and creating a brand new law, they said, ISO 1345 does it right. We're just going to adopt those standards, keep it simple for the entire world, as well as those companies in the United States. So ANSI is where you can go if you want to buy a standard. And again, it's recommended that if you are going through a certification, that you buy a copy of the standard, because that's going to be your Bible. Every place that has the word shall is something that you have to do. Must, could, should are uh, advisable, but they're not required per that standard. So I think there's 136 shalls in the ISO 9001 standard alone. I won't go into the number for 1345; it might scare you a little bit. But regardless, ISO is that governing body that the global world recognizes, that says, yes, when we put this in place, everybody is going to be doing the same thing. So it's important for continuity. So when you go shopping someplace and you buy something that says it's under an ISO certification standard, you know they're pretty much doing everything in a very similar fashion and focused on making their businesses better. So the scope and application, I kind of went into it a little bit already, but 9001 is more of a generic QMS standard. It's a quality management system. And what it does, it applies to any industry, any organization, whether you make widgets or you make paper. So if you're a service organization, it applies, like Kellerman Consulting. Or if you're an actual production facility that makes parts, it applies as well. So it's more of a one size fits all. This business is concerned with making sure they have a quality management system. Let us help them implement something that will make their business better. ISO 1345 is specific to medical devices. Now, I did have a previous webinar that talks about 1345 specifically and how it relates to the FDA. And medical devices come in a wide range of things. It can be a circuit board into a pacemaker, it can be the pacemaker itself, it can be your Apple Watch, it can be a diaper, it can be needles and syringes, it can be an x-ray machine. So medical device is a huge, huge range of different types of products. We want to make sure that the standard is able to be met with everything. Now we'll go into it a little bit later, but medical device covers sterility requirements, environmental particulate controls, because you want something that's going to be safe to use, and they need to have those requirements in place. So if you are an organization that is involved in designing a part, send it to someone else to make it, you're still involved in 1345 medical devices. If you have production, or if you're the person that installs the x-ray machines once they've been built, you have a part of 13485. If you service medical devices outside, again, if you're the one that comes in and has to calibrate those darn things, you are part of 13485. So really, it's tailoring to anything that has to do with a medical device, not just the manufacturer of. It's tailored to meet all the regulatory requirements you might possibly need. So the structural differences between the two, again, 1345 is completely different because it doesn't follow the same structure number wise as ISO 9001 2015. And the reason being is when the global body sat down and took 5 years to create ISO 1345 2016 version, they used as their foundation the ISO 9001 2008 version. So if you were to take the 2008 9001 standard and the ISO 1345 2016 standard, the numbers match up. But in between, when ISO 1345 said, yes, this is what we're doing, we're agreeing, go to public comment, ISO 9001 updated everything and said, here you go, we have a new standard. Well, instead of going back to the drawing board, 13485 says we're good. The foundation didn't change much. We're still rolling off of the 9001 2008 standard. So that's where you'll see some differences when it comes down to which standard or not. They don't exactly meet up apples to apples as far as their clause numbers, but they are close and they do talk about the same things. So, due to those structural differences between 9001 and 1345, it can be a challenge to try to meet both standards at the same time. And why that is because you'll have to put in a grid that says, here is what I'm talking about. I'm talking about management, organization, and context. Here's what the standard is for 9001. Here's what it is for 1345. So that way you can match up and say, okay, here's where you're meeting all the standards of both requirements. But that is to say that 13485 does follow 9001 extremely close. And what the 2008 standard lacked, 1345 already recognized and addressed within that standard itself. So now, if you're looking at the 2015 standard, which is the most current and active version of ISO 9001, you'll say, oh, we talk about risk here, we talk about risk here, we have the same language going on. And that's really what the major differences were between the two standards when they launched in 2015 for 9001 and 2016 for 13485. So, what are some of those changes and challenges and differences now that we've decided that there's more than just medical devices that makes a program different? The biggest one, like I just talked about, is risk management. And risk management is hugely important when it comes to the ISO 13485 standard because you're dealing with patients, you're dealing with people. They are sensitive to things. I used to work as a toxicologist, and my main role was to test things for skin irritation. So if you put a band aid on and you get a rash from it, there's something in that Band-Aid adhesive material that your skin doesn't like. Does there something need to be put on the warning label that says, hey, may cause some allergic reactions? Or is there an opportunity to change the adhesive to not make it so reactive? I also did what was called pyrogen testing, and that's gram-negative bacteria and anything that causes a fever. So you don't want a medical device that's going into your body to be something that makes you ill and gives you a fever and makes your immune system work hard, especially if you're already in the hospital, already dealing with a compromised immune system. ISO 1345 puts these requirements in place to say, have you thought about this? Have you addressed this risk? There is a particular risk management standard dedicated to ISO 1345, kind of as a supplementary, complementary program. It is ISO 14971. And 14971 is just medical device risk management. Now, I say you can use it as a guide as to what risks medical devices are talking about, but I would not reference it in your QMS at any point, because once you reference it in your documentation, FDA certifying bodies are going to say, well, show me where you have implemented that standard. And that's more than it's required. It's not necessary. It's something you can use as a tool to help guide your risk management decision making processes and kind of give some framework as to what a risk management program looks like. It's kind of difficult starting from scratch because you talk about risk all the time. Well, how do you define it? And it's different for every company. So it's not a one size fits all. But most of the time it comes down to, is it something that is high risk and really bad when it happens and it happens all the time, then you want to bring it down to a lower risk. Or if it's something that doesn't happen all the time and it's not really bad when it does, it gets a low risk number. But making those decisions and determinations throughout your entire process is the foundation of what makes 1345 extra special than 9001. Now, 9001 does talk about risk based thinking. So they want to see that you've done some analysis, but ISO 1345 embeds it in multiple sections within the standard, where 9001 says, have you thought about this? Where's your risk management? And it's more of a risks and opportunity assessment, an FMEA, failure modes and effects analysis based on your operation. And what are those two things that says your business is thinking about mitigating risk? So when you talk about 9001 and that broader risk management approach, it aligns easily with the other ISO standards that are out there. So just because we're talking about 13485 today does not mean that that's the only standard out there. Can do what's called an integrated management system, and that would stack the ISO 9001 as your base, and then you can do ISO 14001, which is an environmental management system, on top of 45001, which is an OSHA occupational health and safety program, and all three of those standards can work together very nicely because all of their clauses lined up and it's just one build off of the other. I've used before as a reference that ISO 9001 is the hamburger. If you've got a burger in your hand, 9001 is the meat of the program. That is your basis. You don't have a burger unless you got the meat, right? Can be plant based, can be animal based, doesn't matter, but you've got the burger. Any other standard that can be built upon is the condiments. So think of 1345 as the cheese, right? 9001 with 45,001 with 14,001. That can be the lettuce and the tomato because you constantly just build your burger and make it whatever you want. So you want to think of ISO 9001 as the meat of any of quality management standard, and they're just building and adding any other standard that you come up to it. So again, I mentioned AS 9100D, which is currently the aerospace standard. You've got automotive standards. ISO 22000 is a food standard. Many, many different programs, and they all kind of tie in and talk to each other regarding risk management and that foundational QMS program. Continuous improvement is another big focus. ISO 9001 strongly emphasizes continuous improvement as a key requirement. Now, ISO 9001 isn't merely concerned with what you produce, because again, it's a quality management system. There are companies that don't produce anything. But what it's looking for and what it's talking about is, are you looking at your customer feedback? Are you doing surveys and asking them, hey, how are we doing? Are you getting customer complaints, inquiries, things like that? Internal audit results, continuous improvement projects. How are you bettering your business? So it's more of a customer business focus than an actual product focus, which is what 13485 is. So again, 13485 is going to sit and focus more on maintaining your system effectiveness rather than continuously improving. So its most important piece is if you've got an issue and it's a big enough issue, does it require regulatory reporting? And there's severe adverse event reporting. There is um, talking about having to issue a recall. There's regulatory notices, things that medical devices have to do above and beyond what something of an ISO 9001 program would have to do. So it has a corrective and preventative actions program, but it's focused less on continuous improvement and more on verifying the effectiveness of what you've done. So if you put something new in place based on a customer complaint, did you go back and check to make sure that it effectively removed the reason for the complaint? So it's very much preventative action focused and less on, yep, we got a problem, yo, we solved it. We want to go through and make sure that the checks and balances are in place and you didn't create an issue either downstream or upstream with what that change and improvement you put in place. So it's just got a little more words around it. But again, continuous improvement is a big focus between both standards. We talked about regulatory compliance with the FDA. As of February 2nd, 2026, the FDA 21 CFR Part 820 standard goes from what's currently written and in place to a standard that very much aligns with ISO 1345. And as I mentioned previously, it's one of those things that the FDA says, you know what? We're not going to recreate the wheel. ISO 1345 has been in place since 2016. It's almost been 10 years. It's done really, really well. The global world has accepted it. Everybody says, yes, this is the way to do business if you have a medical device type product. We are just going to adopt those standards. So they may have a couple of unique things, again, regulatory reporting, but overall, the structure of your quality management system as it relates to manufacturing in the United States, FDA is adopting the same principles as 1345. Now, what that means is a company does not have to run out and get certified to 1345 because that's an additional um, cost, certification audits, additional pieces. But what they do have to have is put that program in place. Now, as a company, if you are being asked to follow 1345 standards, there's nothing wrong with getting certified as well, because that it looks really great in the eyes of the FDA. Now, it doesn't mitigate their need to come in and do an inspection because the FDA will always want to put their eyes on things and do a random inspection, but it does give a warm and fuzzy that you are being audited every year, whether it be a certification audit or a surveillance audit, that some company outside of the regulatory body is saying, yes, your programs are in good shape. Yes, we've identified opportunities for improvement. Yes, we found a nonconformance. Let's get it fixed. So they have an additional set of eyes besides what's going on with the FDA. And in this current political climate, there's a lot of unease with, especially government shutdown going on right now, that positions are being removed. What kind of oversight is it going to change with the FDA? And the FDA has come out and said point blank, we are still going to make our focus food, drugs, and cosmetics. They are not changing that focus. Now, we want to make sure that we are making consumers happy and protecting our consumer base and protecting patient safety. So, by following 13485 standards, by getting that certification, it helps to put those good practices in place and ensure that you are meeting product safety, consumer safety, and patient safety out in the consumer marketplace. So ISO 1345 again has that stringent focus on regulatory compliance. And as of February 2nd, it's going to match exactly what the FDA says is regulatory compliance. So that makes life really easy. It's going to emphasize documentation and record keeping. So you are going to have more paper, unfortunately. But with that paper, if you didn't document it, it didn't happen. You want to be able to sit down and say, yes, I don't remember what I had for breakfast yesterday, much less what happened 3 months ago, but I have records and I can tell you exactly what happened 3 months ago. So you want to be able to have proper documentation that allows you to sit back and say, yes, with confidence, I made a product that met regulatory requirements. Here's all the testing that we did. Here's the medical device file. Here's its traceability. Here's everything that I can tell you about this at the time of production. We know it was a safe product when we released it. And that's really the foundation of what 13485 is going to help your programs do. It keeps you out of a recall, it keeps you out of the courts. But again, your paperwork and your programs are only as good as the people who keep them going. So we want to make sure that when you are putting in these ISO standards, that everybody understands their role and making sure that the paperwork is being done correctly and completely every time. Again, with ISO 1345, you're going to have specific requirements to device safety. So if you are holding a piece of that medical device process, whether it be a component supplier or the actual consumer facing product, you are going to have requirements that go up the chain all the way to patient contact that says, yes, I made a safe product and we want to make sure that medical device is safe. ISO 9001, it's a little more flexible. And again, it has to be because it's not dedicated to any one industry or any one business focus. It's a little more flexible because you have the fluidity to build the program to meet what your business does. So it's not a one size fits all. You may not do planning because you're not doing any design and development. Um, you may not have to do some of the pieces that relates to ISO 9001 because again, when it comes to documentation, ISO 1345 is very specific and they say that you've got to have a quality manual. You've got to have a medical device file. You've got to have records that we can follow up on. ISO 9001 doesn't say that you have to have a quality manual. It suggests it, says it's a great thing to put in place, but it's not one of those things that are required at any point. So it's less prescriptive, more of how are you going to show me that you meant the intent of the standard? So you shall have a program, but it doesn't tell you what you have to put in that program. So you have a little more variability as to how you write down what you do that meets the intent of the standard. So it says that you shall have requirements, but it won't be you shall have requirements of a quality manual, if that makes sense. So it's a little less structured, but still has a lot of the program that will make your QMS um, meet the needs of that standard itself. Customer focus. So again, we talked about 9001 has a broad emphasis on customing on focusing on customer satisfaction and exceeding customer expectations. That's the entire basis of 9001. It wants the customer to be happy. It wants your business to be happy because your customers are happy. So it says, how are you going to focus on customer satisfaction and exceeding customer expectations? I'm going to have a continuous improvement program that says I'm going to take customer feedback seriously and we are going to continuously try to make our business better. We're going to have KPIs and quality objectives that focus on measuring our standards, our process, our product, our non-conformances, our corrective actions, and we're going to make sure that we're constantly improving those standards to be a little better every day. So again, it's more of a broad emphasis on customer satisfaction and less on what you make and how you make it. 1345, again, its primary focus is looking at those regulatory requirements, ensuring product safety and effectiveness. And it says that you have to have detailed procedures that go with what are you monitoring and measuring when you actually make this medical device product. Um, if you're sitting back and you're going, oh, I'm only kind of sort of a medical device. What I make can go to multiple avenues and multiple places. Do I have to have 1345 as a medical device regulation and a medical device standard that I have to follow? Um, we'll go into it in just a minute, but if you have something that's being claimed as a medical device, then yes, 1345 is definitely the best way to go. But that doesn't mean you're going to be able to meet every clause within that standard. If you've got a product that you're making that a customer gives you a design and you're not doing any design and development work, you can say that clause is excluded. If you're making something that doesn't require sterility or environmental controls, you can say that clause is excluded. So we want to make sure that you have justification for why that clause is excluded, but not all pieces of the requirements of 134085 is going to meet everything you need as a business. When you're talking about implementation and maintenance, we want to make sure, again, like I said, we're focusing on that customer satisfaction and primary focus on meeting regulatory requirements. And I do have a comment that just came into the chat. Do we need ISO 17025 as we are dealing with medical devices, especially when we outsource sterilization process, or if we are doing in-house and then we need ISO 17025? So 17025 is a um, laboratory management process. So if you are actually physically doing the sterility activities yourself, then yes, 17025 can apply. But if you are outsourcing those sterility activities to another company, you just have to make sure they have ISO 17025 certification. It also is a standard for weights and measures. So if you've got a company that calibrates scales, they would be ISO 17025 certified. So if you are actually doing some of those certification activities yourself, you can have that certification, but it's not required as a part of 13485 itself. Um, Especially when you're talking outsourced processes, you just want to verify that where you're outsourcing is certified to that standard. And again, with any ISO standard, it's not required by law to have certifications, but what it tells your consumers, where you're selling your products to, that you have a program in place to monitor and measure improvement and effectiveness. So you are not required at any point to have a certification, but it definitely is a calling card to improve your business, improve your customer base, and used as a marketing advantage to say, look at what our company has done. We have taken the time and the effort to go forth and be certified under some ISO standard, and we're continuously monitoring and improving. So, to answer your question, Mohammed, no, it is not required to have ISO 17025 as your business unless you are actually doing sterilization activities. And then it's suggested just as a business improvement, it's not required there either. So, again, how do you choose between these standards? And a lot of times, your choice is going to come down to where you sell your products. Not going to lie, things trickle downhill. A part component manufacturer is doing just fine making products for this customer, and all of a sudden the customer says, hey, I need you to be ISO 13485 certified because we are now adding this to our medical device. Or um, sometimes they'll say, hey, we're going to add this now into the aerospace industry. I need you to be AS 9100 certified. Or now this part is going to go into vehicles. I need the TS 16949. So it all depends on your customer and where you're selling your products. I could speak for the food industry. SQF, BRCGS, and FSSC are three globally recognized food safety systems. And if you want to put product into Walmart or Sam's Club or Target or Kroger or any of these other grocery stores, you have to have a food safety certification. Now, they let you pick which one you want, but you still have to have one of the big three in order to sell products and have it distributed in a grocery store. So, most of the time, your choice is made for you based upon where um, you're selling your products to what customer. Now, I would say that if you are doing a product that is not going directly and touching and impacting patient safety, you might be able to do just ISO 9001, especially if you're going off a provided spec. So you're not doing design and development, you don't have any sterility requirements. Um, there are things that can be done and a case that can be made to say that ISO 9001 is more appropriate than 1345. But 9 times out of 10, a company will say, I need supplier A, supplier B, supplier C to be ISO 1345 certified because it makes their job of supplier management easier. So, supplier management absolutely is a piece of both of these standards. But as you can imagine, 1345 has a lot more detail around how you are monitoring, measuring, evaluating, approving, and assessing risk for your supply chain. So, if a company can say, hey, my supply chain, everybody is also ISO 13485 certified, then that makes it easy for them to say low risk, low risk, low risk. In turn, wherever you're getting your materials from, you can say, hey, I only want to source from an ISO 13485 certified company or an ISO 9001 certified company. And that makes your risk less on your supply chain. So it all kind of trickles downhill. So you could say it started with, the hospitals, the Covidians, the BDs, and the different medical device companies that are putting products out in the consumer marketplace and saying, we need you to be certified as well. And it becomes a customer requirement from their end. And that's kind of what we're seeing right now is especially with the FDA adopting ISO 13485 as their regulatory law, we want to be able to have the supply chain meet those requirements as well. So, most of the time, if you are in the medical device sector, you are going to be asked to certify against ISO 13485, plain and simple. You don't get an option if you want to continue business with that particular customer. But if you have an option to say, hey, here is my risk assessment, haha, famous word, risk assessment, and here's where we're scratching out all of this stuff within medical device because we're just a distributor, for example, then they might be able to say, okay, yep, you make sense. 9001 might be sufficient. So, knowledge is key. And being able to sit down with both standards and say, does this apply to me or does it not? Because in reality, there is a cost difference between the cost of an ISO 13485 certification and a 9001. And if you're able to make that cost justification because you're scratching out all the medical device important things and only needing the 9001, then you might be able to say, hey, customer, I could lower your price if you don't require me to do the expensive standard versus the one that's not as expensive. So there's an opportunity, like I said, there to negotiate. But sometimes that answer is going to be no because they're going to say, I need you to be ISO 13485 certified. So ISO 9001 documentation, and the end of the day, is a little more flexible. It's able to be tailored to your business because it's not specific to any one industry, to where medical device wants you to have that prescriptive documentation that's specific to exactly what you do, the quality manuals, the records, the traceability. That's all going to be important to what you do because it does impact consumer and patient safety. So if you put on the glasses and you look at each standard and say which one suits best, you'll really have to look at what each business makes or serves the medical device industry and say, here's where my risk is. Here's where, yep, I'm going to need 13485 for sure. Um, it all just depends on, again, what you make and what you provide to the medical device industry. And with FDA saying 13485 is the gold standard and we're making it our USA law, it becomes then really easy for companies not to have to manage two different standards. You wouldn't have to say, oh, here's all the things that FDA requires, and here's all the things 1345 requires, and I only have to do them for one particular standard or the regulatory. Now they're saying they're one and the same. And when you do get that ISO 13485 certification, you now can do business globally because it's a globally recognized standard. So, whether you're just getting started in the regulatory certification landscape and you want to start small, you can start with ISO 9001 and then develop into 1345. But just know that the numbering system of the clauses between the two standards would have to be changed. And sometimes that's more of a headache than what people want to mess with. So you can go ahead and develop your programs and systems to that ISO 13485 standard, meet your regulatory requirement, and then later get certified as you get more comfortable with your quality management system. So it's not always something that you have to do immediately. But again, once you do have that certification, you are now meeting FDA requirements because you're being audited by an outside body that tells you where your gaps are. Because when you do an internal audit, we have blind eyes, right? We don't always see all the problems. We get that tunnel vision and think our programs are perfect. So it's definitely nice to have an independent outside body that's not the government that can shut you down and create recalls and warning letters come in and tell you, hey, this is where you need to improve your process. Here's where we see some gaps. Here's how you can make it better. What can you do to more fully meet the intent of that ISO 13485 standard? And then that just makes life so much easier when you do have that random FDA inspection. Um, so the benefits to at least following the scheme is great whether you get that certification or not, but you definitely want to create the quality management system against the ISO 13485 standard if you were involved in any way, shape, or form with the medical device industry. Um, so, yeah, that's kind of my thoughts on between the two different programs. And does anybody have any questions? Oh, as per ISO 1345, which shelf life would be best and recommended as part of the standard, especially per FDA? Um, my previous background was in dietary supplements. So shelf life is more of looking at stability. So you want to be able to do studies and analysis to justify why you have a 5 year, 2 year, 3 year product shelf life. Is there degradation of the product? If you have something that would start falling apart after 18 months, you might want to have a shorter shelf life to make sure that when it goes into place, it's not going to be degraded when it comes to um, that product itself. So to answer your question, the FDA doesn't tell you what shelf life you have to do, but they do say that you have to make a risk-based decision and have data that supports why you put that shelf life in place. So whether there's companies out there that will do what's called an accelerated study, and they'll like purposely put environmental conditions on your product. They'll purposely try to mimic real life conditions and see when they start seeing that fall apart at a certain time frame. If you're making a metal part for a wheelchair, your product shelf life can be 20 years, right? Because unless it's being abused and sat outside in the rain and getting rusty, you might never have to worry about shelf life for that product. But if you're doing something that is a needle, syringe, tubing, if you're exposed to heat or your sterility will degrade after a year, you might want to look at different shelf life things. So at the end of the day, um, it depends on your product and it depends on what data you can justify why that shelf life was set. Do you have customer complaint info that says my shelf life was at 5 years, but at 3 years, I'm complaining for issues? Then your shelf life might need to be shortened to that 3 year period. So, FDA again doesn't tell you what you have to do as far as a shelf life date. It's up to your business and what you make and justify why you have that date in place. All right. If wearable devices or tablets have to be sanitized and wiped down as part of kitting, does that mean ISO 17025 standards have to be followed, or is this just a simple sanitization activity? It can be, I wouldn't call it simple because, again, you'll still have to make sure that what sanitizing agent you're using is effective and is at the right concentration and won't cause further issues like skin irritation. So you don't have to be ISO 17025 certified for the kitting process, but you definitely want to have a procedure in place that clearly documents here's the solution that I used, here's its concentration, here's its dwell time on the product, here's what we did to maintain that sterility barrier once it was applied, and just clearly document that out in a procedure in a program. But no, it's not required to be ISO 17025 certified for that. You're welcome. Happy to help. All right. Anybody else have any questions? I'm enjoying these. I like questions. All right. Well, if there's no more questions, I do have my contact information here listed on the Q&A screen. Feel free to reach out to either myself or Kellerman Consulting as a whole. We'll be happy to talk to you and support you and help you make decisions that's best for your business and maintains consumer satisfaction and customer patient safety. All right. Well, thank you, everybody, and have a great day. Bye.